We have a returning guest on, Ryan Chaw. Really appreciate your time, Ryan. And just so that everybody can follow along, I'm going to send everybody to your website again, newbierealestateinvesting.com/guide. And take advantage of this, people, because Ryan is offering something special there. So head over to, again, newbierealestateinvesting.com/guide. And we're going to kind of dive into some of what he's offering through that online form there. But really appreciate your time and welcome back, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for welcoming me back on the podcast, Jack. I'm happy to be on.
So since the last time we talked, and you can kind of go back to episode 158, and I'm quickly closing in on episode 300 when we're recording this, Ryan. So it's been a while.
Right.
So since then, you've picked up a couple more rental properties.
Yeah. So for those who don't know my story, I basically was inspired to get into real estate investing from my grandpa, who bought a couple properties in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this was back in the 50s when they were dirt cheap. And of course, we all know the real estate market went up like crazy. Rents went up, and he was able to have the rental income basically cover all of his expenses and live a life of financial independence. And what I got started as soon as possible after I graduated as a pharmacist. One thing that happened during my hospital, like my first hospital job, is I talked to one of the older pharmacists. He was around, I think, 59 or so. And I asked him, hey, what do you like about being a pharmacist? And he told me, to tell you the truth, Ryan, I would have quit a long time ago if I could have. I'm mainly here to collect a paycheck. And I realized then that, I didn't want to follow that traditional path of go to college, get a job, work 9 to 5 until you're 65 and then retire. I wanted to create my own path to basically don't have to go to work if I don't want to. If I go to work, I'm choosing to go to work, right? I want to be able to live a life where I can choose to basically a life of flexibility, where I can choose to spend more time with family, choose more time to travel the world, explore different hobbies of mine, or go into mentorship or education, right?
Sure. Well, you're a perfect example of what we were going to try to dive into this a little bit today, because we run into a lot of people, probably you as well, that they're frankly what I would classify as house rich and rental property poor. So how did you leverage your Heloc to do some of your real estate investing?
Yeah, so currently I have 6 properties. I basically bought one property per year. And what I do is I invest in local college towns and I rent out by the bedrooms. So I buy usually houses with pretty large square footage and add as many extra bedrooms as I can, because every extra bedroom I can add is an additional $600 to $800 in rental income. And what I did was, at first I put like a 20% down payment on my first property. And then that property really went up like crazy. It went up 60,000, I think, the first year. And then 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, it's up about $168,000. So I was able to take out a HELOC on that property, or it's called a home equity line of credit. It's basically, I took out $100,000 as kind of like a credit card. It's a revolving line of credit where the interest rate is a low rate. It's variable, but it's a low rate, around 4 or 5% for me when I originally took it out. And I used like $50,000 of that, $100,000 to put towards the 4th property down payment. And I used $50,000 to put towards the 5th property down payment. And that allowed me to scale so much more quickly. I also reinvested the cash flow that I was making on the original, my first, second, and third property, because I rent out by the room, right? So that allows me to double my typical rental income. A house that usually rents out for $1,500 per month will actually rent out for around $3,100 per month. My highest one rents out for $3,700 per month in rental income because I basically rent by that bedroom, right?
Right.
College students.
Yeah. This was fascinating at the time that you've been able to pull this off, because a lot of real estate investors that are in California actually invest out of state because they can't seem to get the numbers to work. But you've really found this kind of magic formula that you've been able to get this to work for you. Plus, You mentioned before we hit record, taking advantage of some of those really low interest rates that are going on right now and locking some of that in.
Oh yeah, definitely. Interest rates are like below 3%, especially for owner-occupied properties. So I actually am house hacking a house in Sacramento, California. Made it a 5-bedroom house, rented out the 4 other bedrooms to tenants, and I'm taking advantage of interest rate of 2.75% right now. And actually, right now is the best time to buy because the Fed has said they'll likely be raising the interest rates next year to combat inflation. So if you were thinking of getting into real estate investing, now is actually definitely one of the best times to lock in a low rate to make sure your mortgage payments are pretty low.
Yeah, this is definitely the time to take advantage of it, especially if you do have some of the funds that are available, especially locked in your personal residence. How did you find that process to be then when it came to your HELOC? Did you when when you were talking and negotiating with the bank, was that fairly easy value to unlock?
Yeah, so I always recommend checking out a couple different lenders to see what they can offer you. My HELOC actually did a promo rate. They did like 2% for the first year or so for your owner occupied property. So you want to explore the different options out there. There's some HELOC banks that will basically cap your rate as well. So even though it's a variable rate, they'll cap it at, let's say, 7% or 8% and won't go past that no matter what. The other thing about the HELOC that's really cool is that you don't have to take it out unless you need it. So you can keep it at $0 and you don't have to pay any fees or anything whatsoever on the HELOC until you actually need it to put a down payment on a house. But here's the thing. If you are getting like a HELOC and it's a 5% interest rate and you're buying a house that makes a 12% or 15 or 20% cash on cash return for your initial HELOC investment, well, you're borrowing at a 5% interest rate and then you're getting a 12% return. So you're making that 7% return spread that, is between the HELOC interest rate and the cash on cash return you're making on that property. Plus you're getting appreciation, you're getting tax write-offs, depreciation. You're also getting rental income increases and equity pay down. So if you can take out a HELOC and you have some equity on your property, I highly recommend you do it because it just makes sense, right? Even though you're using some debt to borrow on that, you're making such a high return that it just makes sense to make that money, or sorry, to take it out.
Well, you mentioned that early on in this conversation, you mentioned you've acquired like one property every year, but you mentioned in this scenario, you actually acquired 2 when you got that HELOC on that one rental property. Have you found that you're at the point now where it's going to start to accelerate like that?
Yeah, so at this point, I kind of have 2 choices. I could, it's kind of like the choice that every real estate investor has. I could either pay off some of my properties and then that will boost my cash flow and I could just live off of that. I could do that by age of 31. Basically, what I do is I could sell my first property. It would pay off 3 of my other properties, and I'll be making a cash flow of $7,500. That's after expenses and everything, taxes, etc. And then I basically live off that $7,500 per month for the rest of my life. Or I could continue scaling, taking HELOCs out. I have about $500,000 in equity on my houses right now, so I could take out a $500,000 HELOC. Sorry, I have more than 500. I think I have about 1 point something million in equity on the properties, but that would allow me to actually take out a HELOC of about 500,000, 600,000. And so I could use that to scale further and accelerate. I mean, with a $500,000 HELOC, I could probably purchase like 4 or 5 properties. Right now, I'm kind of playing with the idea of going that way or the other way. But right now I have 6 properties that's making $17,510 per month in rental income.
Sure. And that's the gross right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's the gross.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's a great, you're defining like the perfect scenario, and then you're doing it in a relatively difficult market. We talked about, let's back up for a moment and chat a little bit about this. I know if people wanted to go into more detail, look up episode number 158 with Ryan, where we kind of covered this in more detail, but kind of break things down a little bit for us. How did you come around again to this concept of renting out per room instead of the traditional rental?
Yeah, so I actually saw my friend doing that in college. He was house hacking. He basically lived in a room. This house was very close to campus, and then he rented out the other bedrooms, and the other bedrooms basically paid down his mortgage. And he also gained appreciation on the house, etc. So I figured, hey, if he could do it, why can't I do it, right? And so I basically started out with a single family home, $262,000 near my pharmacy school. And I actually had a lot of things that came up on that house. I actually lost over $30,000. So there's definitely room for improvement when I started out. But what happened is I basically held on to that house. It went up 168,000. I put in a fourth bedroom, and that was able to make a cash flow of about $600 per month. And I basically just improved on that model and perfected it throughout the years, basically getting my marketing system in place, my management systems in place. Like for marketing, I have something called the Prime system that I use to get high quality tenants. And so I didn't have to worry about evicting tenants because it's usually the parents paying the rent, right? So you don't have to worry about evictions most times. And if you choose the right tenants, you don't have to worry about having the headaches of having to manage the tenants.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about your $30,000 mistake. Like what happened there that
Yeah,
that?
so the very first property I bought was a 100-year-old property. And for those out there getting started, I would recommend staying away from houses that cost or that are older than 100 years old, because there tends to be a lot of things that kind of go wrong with it. Things are older, right? So they tend to break down. So my first house, I had two issues, two big issues. The one issue was that the house didn't have a very good AC system. So during the summer, I had tenants that were complaining that's like 90 degrees in the house and they can't sleep, right? The second issue that happened is actually I got a phone call around 10 or 11 p.m. at night. I still remember. It was on the weekend, and he told me, hey, there's sewage coming out of the kitchen sink. It spilled out over the kitchen floor. It's gross. It smells horrible. And so I had to get somebody out there to clean it up, right? And then I also had to stick a camera down the sewage line to see what was going on. It turned out the whole sewage line was crushed and broken by the tree roots that were sticking into it. So I had to replace the whole sewage line, and that cost $7,000. And the AC system, I had to replace the whole AC system. That one cost about 15,000, somewhere between $15,000 and $18,000. So what I did actually was I made a deal with my father. At the time, I only had $7,000 left in the bank, but I owed over $23,000. So what I asked, or the deal that I created was he lent me the $23,000 to create a bedroom, an extra bedroom at the house, to get the new AC system, to repair the sewage line. In exchange, he gets $550 per month on that bedroom that he created for the rest of his life. So after 3 years, it would pay back his full $23,000. And after that, he makes about a 29% return on cash invested. So for him, it's a win-win situation, right? He invested the money, he gets a return for the rest of his life. And for me, I was able to make the repairs and have that extra bedroom.
Do you still have that house today?
I do. Yes. I do still have it today. But I am, again, like I said, I'm playing with the idea of maybe selling that house because it went up in price like crazy, as real estate kind of does in California. The appreciation in California is really high. Even though your cash flow is a little bit lower, your appreciation is crazy. So I'm playing with the idea of selling that, paying off the three of my rental properties, 3 out of the 6, and then basically retiring, and then living a life of financial freedom, maybe traveling the world for a bit, or just getting into, I teach students how to do exactly what I do in student housing. So maybe exploring, expanding that business, or, picking up a hobby.
Sure. Well, you mentioned some tips, this concept that you have regarding student housing. You mentioned some tips around marketing. How have you learned? What are your tactics there, or a few of your tactics?
Yeah, so I use something called the Prime system, which is the system I created. The P stands for placement of advertising. So wherever your target tenant is, you want to place your ads where that target tenant hangs out. So it's kind of like if you are placing your ads where they don't hang out, it's like fishing in an empty pond, which you don't want to do. So for me, I kind of look at Facebook groups, Craigslist, but I basically figure out where do the college tenants hang out. Maybe it's campus bulletin boards, and I place my ads there. The second thing is R, which is reviewing social media. So once they contact me either through Facebook or email, I'll kind of look through their social media. I'll go through their Facebook and look for things like smoking, alcohol, drugs, maybe raves, see what type of tenant they are. Like, are they a party type who, smokes or does drugs and all of that? Or are they somebody who's more professional? Maybe they're going into a professional school like pharmacy, dentistry, medical school, or nursing, right? So those are going to be the more high quality type tenants. The I stands for identifying the type of tenant they are. So are they somebody who gets angry easily? Are they somebody who's constantly looking for a cheaper deal? Are they asking for things they shouldn't be asking for? Are they a very picky tenant? That kind of thing. And then M stands for measuring responsiveness. So I find that the more responsive a tenant is, the more responsible they are. So a tenant who gets back to me right away, like when I ask, hey, your rent is late, can you get me the rent as soon as possible? I want that type of tenant over somebody who's going to wait 3 weeks to respond, right? Mm-hmm. So I look for those who are responsible, responsive, professional, that type of thing. And then E stands for ensuring proof of income. So though it's the students staying at the house, it's actually the parents who usually are paying the income, or paying the rent. So I kind of look at the last few 2-month bank statements and credit score of the parent, either that or pay stubs, or for students, sometimes they take out student loans or they have financial aid. And I basically ensure that they can afford the rent so that we're not dealing with unpaid rent, right? And having to go down the eviction pathway, which I've never had to deal with, especially in the student housing market.
You're probably going to answer this second next question based on regarding managing these rentals. But before we go there, I want to remind everybody again, newbierealestateinvesting.com/guide for Ryan's information and to get some of this information that Ryan is talking about here today. So managing these properties, how do you ensure that you have, half a dozen of these college kids are sharing a living space that they're going to get along?
Yeah, that's a great question. And here's the thing. You might have tenant conflict come up, but as long as you have a system and protocol in place for if this happens, I will do X, or, this is what's going to happen, then everything kind of works itself out. So it's really about having the systems and processes in place. For example, if I have a tenant versus tenant conflict, what I do is I have the tenant who's complaining talk directly to the tenant they're complaining about, face to face, and then having that discussion, explaining, why they're upset, and then coming up with an actionable plan that they can take and implement to make sure this doesn't happen again. And then I have them implement the plan. And most times that's enough. What I don't do, what I actually did at the beginning, which was a mistake, was I basically took that complaint and then I called up the other tenant and said, hey, the other tenants are complaining about you. What are you going to do? Because that just escalates the situation a lot of times, because now the tenant is going like, this guy's talking behind my back, telling the landlord on me, and so he just gets angrier, he or she, right? Mm-hmm. So having the tenants kind of work it out face to face first and having a plan together and coaching them through that process really dissolves a lot of the conflict. You also want to have a good team in place. So if something breaks down, like let's say you have a broken appliance, like a washer, dryer, or stovetop or whatever breaks down, you need to have a handyman in place that can go in and get the thing fixed within the first week or the first couple of days of it breaking. The other thing is having people like specialist contractors for more bigger projects, or maybe for me, it's putting those extra bedrooms in. I have somebody who is good at putting up the drywall, putting in the door and everything, and putting in those bedrooms. And I just use him every time I need to put in a bedroom. So having the teams in place and having those contractors that you can trust to get the job done is very essential as well, to have a strong system to make this passive 6-figure rental income or whatever your goal is.
Sure. So what are some of those other tactics? I know that you frankly don't you do self-manage these properties to a certain extent anyway, but what are some of those other strategies that you've mentioned that you spend maybe an hour a week managing these properties? What other
Mhm.
strategies and
Yeah.
tactics have
So
you?
yeah, definitely. So like definitely the marketing. I'll post on the Facebook groups, and I have basically kind of like a funnel where I have them look through. I give them a rental app to fill out, and then they get that back to me. I offer them a video tour of the house, or maybe one of the tenants could give a tour of the house, one of the current tenants that is, or I'll ask for proof of income, and then I'll have them sign the lease. So I basically have kind of a funnel, a step-by-step process for marketing and getting the tenants from applying for your house all the way to a signed lease. The other thing is, like I mentioned, the tenant showing the home to future tenants or future prospective tenants. What I do is I have the current tenants basically do an open house. So I have all the tenants come in on one day, and that kind of creates that demand because they're like, oh, they get that FOMO, right? This other guy is also looking into getting the bedroom that I'm looking at, right? So I
Mhm.
better, get my paperwork in and get a lease signed as soon as possible if I want to snag the room. And so that creates that demand and allows you to charge basically whatever market rent price you want to charge or premium price you want to charge. And yeah, so that's just one tactic, having an open house basically and having one of the current tenants do the showing. So
Yeah.
basically kind of create these different protocols and plans in place allows you to create that system.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I had learned to do too, is the inviting everybody at the same time. But mine was for single family homes. So if I had a single family home for rent, I would set up one time, one location, invite everybody there at one time. That really helped. That really
Yes,
helped.
exactly. Uh-huh. It
And
creates that urgency and demand that makes the prospective tenant think, okay, I should be, pretty quick about this. There's a time limit. There's a deadline to this. I can't just sit on this application forever.
yeah,
Hmm.
one of the other things that now I'm going to mention something I've been doing lately with a lot, well, for quite a while now with quite a bit of success. Have you seen those? They're like $25, $30. They're Wise cameras. You can,
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
they're
seen those.
very
Yep.
inexpensive
Hmm.
cameras. And then I have internet at most of my places so that, or a hotspot, and I put a Wise camera in the vacant unit, and then a lockbox on the door. And if somebody wants to see it at any time, it seems like there's a sense of urgency there. Like
Hmm.
if somebody is looking for a property and I have to do some sort of scheduling, I
Hmm.
have a less likely chance of getting somebody in place versus, yeah, you can come anytime. This is the process. It's
Yeah.
always great to have that process
Structure.
associated with
Right.
it.
Definitely. Yeah. And I use lock boxes, of course, as well. So if ever a contractor needs to get into the house, they just use that lock box to let themselves in, get the work done. And then they send me a bill. I send them a check. And that's, a pretty simple process.
Yeah, no, it works so slick, especially when they're on their best behavior, because I always let them know too that there's a camera in the unit. It's not something that's hidden by any
Right.
stretch. So, but yeah, so it's probably pretty beneficial to them that you have those residents that are already living there doing the tours or hosting these events on your
Hmm.
behalf.
Hmm.
Do they provide you some sort of direct feedback too regarding some of the people that have come through?
Yeah, definitely. I can ask them, hey, how did you like the tenants? Did they seem like a responsible tenants, professional type? Another thing I do is I ask for referrals too. And sometimes I even offer like a referee, I don't know how to say that, but referee fee. So like if a tenant who's referred to me by another tenant signs up, maybe I might give them $100 once the lease is signed, right? But here's the thing, once you reach a certain scale, like for me, I have 23 students in one school. Each of those 23 students knows another maybe three friends that might want to stay with them, right? So all of a sudden, 23 times three, that's like 69, right? You have 69 prospective tenants who might want to stay at your house. So I would say at least 50, 60, maybe 70% of my incoming tenants, just come through to me through a referral network by word of mouth, because I've achieved that scale, that magnitude that allows me to just rely on referrals at this point.
Sure. So how long is your typical resident staying there? Is it 4 years, 2 years? What does that
Yeah, that's
typically
a
look
good
like?
question. I would say maybe 50% might be just 1 year. Another good 25%, 30% is like 2 years. And then another maybe 10% to 20%, maybe like 3 years, 4 years, etc. Yeah.
Sure. So
Mhm.
what is that? What, do you typically do like 1 month of deposit similar to any other apartment?
I do 1.5 months deposit, and I only offer a 1 year lease for everyone. So basically, August to August of the next year.
Sure.
And that allows me basically to make sure I don't have any vacancies. It's back to back. One student leaves, the next student comes in. Very similar to how like student housing works on campus as well.
Sure. Have you found that there's ever any times where I suppose you're vetting them out to the point where you don't have a lot of this, but
Mhm.
where you have to do some major repairs or carpet replacements and stuff that you have to give yourself some time there between residents?
That's a good question. So the only repair we've had to do and like keep deposit money was one time when the student accidentally broke a window. He just leaned back in the chair and accidentally broke the window. But other than that, I haven't really had to do any major repairs. I do have a maid kind of do a deep cleaning of the property in between. So sometimes I'll put like a week gap. Sometimes most times it's back to back, but sometimes I'll have like a week gap in between where I could do the deep cleaning, replace flooring or whatever if I wanted to do that. I think there was one house where the carpet got really dirty, so I just replaced it with vinyl plank. So I had a week or a week and a half or so to do that.
Sure. So do you is this part of the lease agreement too? Is that they as a group somehow have to put together some sort of plan to keep the common areas clean?
Not necessarily. Generally, they depends on the tenant, I should say. There are some tenants that were a little bit more trashy than others, but as long as it's clean by the end of the lease, I'm okay with it. I don't really care about what happens in between, but I do coach them through, hey, you have to make sure you remove all the food from the refrigerator before the next tenants come in. You have to make sure, you take out the trash, etc. Sometimes I solicit help from the parents as well. The parents will come in with their vacuum or whatever and vacuum the whole place. So I've been generally able to do that and hire the maid as well to help me with the cleaning process.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I've had I can't remember the fellow's name right now, but I've had another person who does something similar to you actually, and he must be in a different part of the country and different type of colleges because he has had some significant issues with the common areas and keeping things in order. Those shared areas to the point where he has learned to add additional costs to the overall. I think he charges an extra $20 a room or something to have a maid come in like once a week to tidy up after these college kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people do that. They do like twice a month or once a month. I haven't really had to do that too much from my experience, but I guess it depends. I also try to tenant proof my property as much as possible. So
Sure.
wherever I can, I try to put in like vinyl plank if there's, carpet originally, so that I don't have to, deal with cleanup issues.
Yeah. Vinyl plank has been a lifesaver. I've been slowly moving some of those rental properties to that as well, especially in the living room and stuff area. Being where I'm at, it's kind of more common to make sure that the bedrooms still have carpeting, but it's those common areas that have been all going to that vinyl plank.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the other cool thing about this strategy is because you're making a good $1,000, $1,500 in cash flow, pretty much per single family house. You have the funds if there is a major repair that comes up. A lot of people who are only making like $200, $300 in cash flow, it's just not enough. It doesn't make sense to me because that every single house that you eventually have to replace a roof, you have to eventually replace an HVAC or water heater, etc. Right? So if you have one HVAC repair that costs like $8,000, $10,000, that's going to wipe out your cash flow for the whole year if you only make $100, $300 in cash flow. For us, though, 1,000, 1,500 cash flow per year, it's pretty easy to make those repairs that eventually.
Yeah, no, that's what makes this concept really attractive is that you have a much higher return on that investment. So, you mentioned that you try to do a year lease. What happens if somebody bugs out early? Like, they decide college isn't a good fit.
Yeah. So there are definitely, like, the school year is usually like fall semester, spring semester, and then they're off for the summer, right? So a lot of times, at least the schools I invest in, they have summer school. So what I say is, hey, it's a year lease, but you can always sublease it during the summer. Or if you're taking summer school yourself, you can definitely stay at the property. And what I do is I offer to help them find a subletter as well, because there's plenty of students who take summer classes. Usually every time I'm able to find a subletter, as long as they let me know early enough.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So, with all of these, you got a lot of college kids coming and going. There's a lot of moving parts going on here in these properties. What are you using to manage all this?
Yeah, so I actually self-manage the properties, again, with the systems I have in place for marketing, management. I have a team of contractors. So I want to say it's all self-managed property. Obviously, I'm not going in there fixing the toilets. It's going to be my team of contractors who help me on that. For rent, I usually collect rent through Zelle, which is an electronic payment app. And that way I don't have to worry about the check got lost in the mail, that type of issue. And I keep track of expenses and income through Excel. So for me, it's pretty easy. Eventually, I might want to outsource this out when I get to like maybe 10 properties. But right now, sitting at 6 properties, this is totally doable. I actually work 32 hours a week as a pharmacist still. So 4 days a week, essentially. And I'm able to manage this rental system on the side. Again, like it only takes like less than an hour a week because I have those systems in place already.
So just in a nutshell, then, over the past 6 years, you've accumulated 6 rental properties. That's grossing about $17,000 a month.
Yeah, a bit more than about $17,510 per month.
Yeah. Congratulations, man. That's awesome. So
a lot of it is kind of the relationship. A lot of it is about the relationship you establish with your tenants. You want to have a strong bond of trust between you and the tenants. And that ensures that things go smoothly along the way, because if you need their help, they're willing to help you, as long as you are showing that you're trying to help them and service them as best as possible as a landlord. So a lot of things I do is kind of work with my tenants to get things done. I call it tenant empowerment. So I show them, okay, if the internet goes down, this is what you do, type of thing. And I have instructions for this type of stuff as well. So we kind of work together as a team, and I include tenants as part of my team.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you mentioned early on, is the fact that you look for those people that are responsive to you rather quickly. That kind of is a double-edged sword, right? You also have to be very responsive to your tenants.
Yeah, exactly. So, but at the same time, you also uphold the rules as a landlord, right? If they are, causing trouble or angering the other tenants, you have to step in and take your leadership there.
Right. Well, one last reminder: head over to newbierealestateinvesting.com/guide and take Ryan up on his offer there. We have Ryan Chaw on the line here again. And again, Ryan, before I let you go, is there a question you wished I would have asked you here today?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything. As far as scaling, be open to taking on partners, be open to using equity on your property or to pay for, the down payment on your future properties. And for those who don't have their first rental, what's the very first step you need to take to get started? So boiling it down to the very first step, like maybe it's just calling a real estate agent up and asking, hey, can I just look at, see some of the properties, or maybe just give me a video walkthrough of some of the properties around this area because I'm thinking of doing this, right? That's that's the best way to get started. I mean, you could read all the books, listen to, bigger podcasts, or, read all the blogs as much as you want, or listen to this podcast too. But if you don't get started, then nothing happens, right? So getting started, taking that first step, even though it's scary, will put you further ahead than even if you read like 10, 20 books, right? So I just encourage all those who don't have their first rental just to get, dive in, find a mentor if you, want to go into a specific area, find somebody, like if you're flipping, find somebody who's good at flipping, right? If you need help in student housing, you can contact me. Again, the www.investing.com/guide is a free guide that I provide for you guys for basically my system for getting started and scaling to a 6-figure portfolio.
Well, thank you again, Ryan. This was a great conversation. I hope you come back again sometime very soon. Let's do this sooner than 150 episodes later.
Sounds good, Jack.